Most people believe that money starts working harder than they do once they have enough invested. The problem is that very few can clearly define what enough actually means. As a result, many people spend decades investing consistently, earning decent salaries, and still remain fully dependent on their job for financial survival. Here is the core issue. Income from work feels stable and predictable, while investment income feels abstract and distant. A paycheck arrives every 2 weeks. Investment returns fluctuate, are quoted annually, and often look insignificant in the early years. Because of this, people assume they are progressing financially simply because their net worth is growing. In reality, their financial structure remains fragile for much longer than they realize. To understand the problem, we need to separate net worth growth from cash flow replacement. A person earning $100,000 per year might save and invest $20,000 annually. After 10 years, assuming a reasonable average return of 7%, their portfolio could reach roughly $275,000, $300,000. On paper, this looks successful. However, that portfolio generates about $19,000, $21,000 per year before taxes at a 7% return, and far less if withdrawals are done responsibly. Their job still provides more than 80% of their financial power. This is where most people misjudge their situation. They see six figures in investments and assume they are close to financial independence. They are not. The portfolio is growing, but it is not yet dominant. Their time and labor still account for nearly all usable income. The misunderstanding becomes clearer when we look at scale. If someone earns $8,000 per month after taxes, their investments would need to reliably generate at least that amount to work harder than they do. At a conservative 4% annual withdrawal rate, that requires approximately $2.4 million in invested assets. Even at a more aggressive 5%, the figure is still around $1.9 million. These numbers are far higher than what most people imagine when they think they are doing well. The consequence of this misunderstanding is subtle but serious. People optimize the wrong things. They focus on maximizing salary, negotiating bonuses, or adding side income while underestimating how long it takes for capital to compound to a meaningful level. They believe they are building freedom, but structurally, they are still trading time for money. Another consequence is emotional complacency. Because investments are growing every year, even modestly, people feel progress and delay difficult decisions. They postpone increasing savings rates, avoid restructuring expenses, or take on lifestyle inflation, assuming future returns will solve the problem. Mathematically, this delays the point at which capital income can overtake labor income by many years. The real problem, then, is not a lack of discipline or intelligence. It is a lack of clarity about when money actually becomes the primary engine of financial life. Without a clear threshold, people rely on intuition, and intuition consistently underestimates the scale required for capital to replace labor. At this stage, it is important not to jump to solutions. The key is to understand the gap between feeling financially secure and actually being financially independent. Until that gap is measured and understood, most people will continue doing the right things while remaining dependent on work far longer than they expect. The reason this problem persists is structural, not motivational. Most people organize their financial lives around income from work, and investments are treated as a secondary system rather than a primary one. Even disciplined savers often build portfolios that grow in value but remain functionally passive and disconnected from day-to-day financial reality. Start with income structure. For the majority of professionals, 85 now or 95% of usable monthly cash flow comes from employment. Investment accounts grow in the background and are rarely designed to produce spendable income in the near or medium term. Retirement accounts are locked behind age restrictions, brokerage accounts are framed as long-term, and dividends or interest are usually reinvested automatically. This creates a situation where net worth increases, but financial dependence does not decrease. Behavior reinforces this structure. When people receive raises or bonuses, they adjust their lifestyle first and their investment system second. A higher salary often leads to higher fixed costs, larger housing payments, higher car expenses, or more discretionary spending that quietly becomes permanent. Even when savings increase in absolute terms, savings as a percentage of income often stagnate or decline. The result is that capital accumulation slows just as expectations rise. Consider a concrete example. Take a 35-year-old professional earning $120,000 per year. After taxes and benefits, they take home roughly $7,000 per month. They save solely $500 monthly across retirement and brokerage accounts, which is objectively strong by conventional standards. After 15 years, assuming consistent contributions and a 7% annual return, their portfolio may reach approximately $750,000, $850,000. This looks substantial. However, even at that level, a sustainable 4% withdrawal produces about $30,000, $34,000 per year, or less than half of their current after-tax income. Despite disciplined saving for over a decade, their job remains the dominant financial engine. Now contrast this with a different structure. A second individual earns the same income but prioritizes building investable capital earlier by maintaining lower fixed costs and channeling 30-35% of income into investments. After 15 years, the portfolio could exceed $1.2 million. At that level, investment income begins to meaningfully compete with labor income. The difference is not talent or luck, it is system design. Standard financial advice often fails because it focuses on behaviors in isolation rather than on outcomes. Save more, diversify, and invest for the long term are directionally correct but incomplete. They do not answer the critical question: how much capital is required for investments to materially change your dependence on work? Without that benchmark, people optimize for comfort instead of leverage. Another common failure is over-reliance on average return assumptions. A 7% long-term return sounds powerful, but returns apply to capital, not effort. A 7% return on $50,000 is functionally irrelevant to a six-figure income. The same return on $1.5 million is life-altering. Standard advice rarely emphasizes that the early years are mathematically weak and that the system only becomes effective after sufficient scale is reached. The absence of a clear system creates false confidence. People believe time alone will solve the problem. In reality, time without aggressive capital accumulation only produces gradual improvement, not independence. Until investment income is deliberately engineered to rival earned income, money does not work harder than the individual. It merely assists them. The first and most common mistake is confusing net worth growth with financial leverage. Many people track their progress by looking at total portfolio value without evaluating what that portfolio actually does for them. A growing balance feels like success, but if it does not materially reduce dependence on earned income, it does not change the underlying financial risk. Over 5 or even 10 years, this leads to a false sense of security, while the core dependency on work remains intact. A second mistake is underestimating the role of savings rate relative to income. High earners often assume that income alone will solve the problem. In practice, a person earning $150,000 and saving 10% accumulates capital more slowly than a person earning $80,000 and saving 30%. Over 20 years at a 7% return, the first scenario results in roughly $600,000 in invested assets. The second scenario, despite the lower income, produces closer to $1 million. The difference is not income level, but the decision structure around cash flow. The third mistake is delaying aggressive investment during the early and middle career years. Many people plan to save more later once their income increases or their lifestyle stabilizes. This delay has a measurable cost. Investing $2,000 per month for 20 years at 7% results in approximately $1.04 million. Investing the same amount for 10 years results in about $345,000. The lost decade cannot be recovered by higher contributions later without significantly higher risk or sacrifice. Another critical mistake is relying on retirement accounts as the sole engine of independence. Tax-advantaged accounts are efficient, but they are structurally illiquid before certain ages. Someone with $900,000 in retirement accounts at age 45 may appear wealthy on paper, yet still require full-time work because accessing that capital triggers penalties or taxes. Over 10 to 20 years, this creates a mismatch between perceived wealth and actual flexibility. The long-term consequences of these mistakes compound slowly but decisively. After 5 years, the impact may appear minimal. modest portfolio growth, and continued job reliance. After 10 years, the gap becomes clearer. Two individuals with similar incomes but different systems may differ by several $100,000 in investable assets. After 20 years, the difference is structural. One individual has investment income that can cover 40–60% of living expenses, while the other remains fully dependent on work despite decades of effort. To illustrate this, compare two scenarios. Person A earns $100,000, saves 15%, and increases lifestyle costs with each raise. After 20 years, they may accumulate roughly $750,000. Person B earns the same amount, saves 30%, and maintains stable expenses. After 20 years, their portfolio can exceed $1.5 million. At a 4% withdrawal rate, Person A can generate $30,000 annually. Person B can generate $60,000. The difference is not income, intelligence, or discipline. It is the decision to design capital accumulation as a primary objective rather than a side effect. The core insight is simple. Money does not begin working harder than you do at a specific salary level. It does so at a specific capital threshold. Failing to recognize this leads to decades of correct behavior applied to an ineffective structure. The first and most common mistake is confusing net worth growth with financial leverage. Many people track their progress by looking at total portfolio value without evaluating what that portfolio actually does for them. A growing balance feels like success, but if it does not materially reduce dependence on earned income, it does not change the underlying financial risk. Over 5 or even 10 years, this leads to a false sense of security, while the core dependency on work remains intact. A second mistake is underestimating the role of savings rate relative to income. High earners often assume that income alone will solve the problem. In practice, a person earning $150,000 and saving 10% accumulates capital more slowly than a person earning $80,000 and saving 30%. Over 20 years at a 7% return, the first scenario results in roughly $600,000 in invested assets. The second scenario, despite the lower income, produces closer to $1 million. The difference is not income level, but the decision structure around cash flow. The third mistake is delaying aggressive investment during the early and middle career years. Many people plan to save more later, once their income increases or their lifestyle stabilizes. This delay has a measurable cost. Investing $2,000 per month for 20 years at 7% results in approximately $1.04 million. Investing the same amount for 10 years results in about $345,000. The lost decade cannot be recovered by higher contributions later without significantly higher risk or sacrifice. Another critical mistake is relying on retirement accounts as the sole engine of independence. Tax-advantaged accounts are efficient, but they are structurally illiquid before certain ages. Someone with $900,000 in retirement accounts at age 45 may appear wealthy on paper, yet still require full-time work because accessing that capital triggers penalties or taxes. Over 10 to 20 years, this creates a mismatch between perceived wealth and actual flexibility. The long-term consequences of these mistakes compound slowly but decisively. After 5 years, the impact may appear minimal, modest portfolio growth and continued job reliance. After 10 years, the gap becomes clearer. Two individuals with similar incomes but different systems may differ by several $100,000 in investable assets. After 20 years, the difference is structural. One individual has investment income that can cover 40 to 60% of living expenses, while the other remains fully dependent on work despite decades of effort. To illustrate this, compare two scenarios. Person A earns $100,000, saves 15%, and increases lifestyle costs with each raise. After 20 years, they may accumulate roughly $750,000. Person B earns the same amount, saves 30%, and maintains stable expenses. After 20 years, their portfolio can exceed $1.5 million. At a 4% withdrawal rate, Person A can generate $30,000 annually. Person B can generate $60,000. The difference is not income, intelligence, or discipline. It is the decision to design capital accumulation as a primary objective rather than a side effect. The core insight is simple. Money does not begin working harder than you do at a specific salary level. It does so at a specific capital threshold. Failing to recognize this leads to decades of correct behavior applied to an ineffective structure. The practical solution to this problem is not to chase higher returns or take on additional risk. It is to deliberately restructure your financial system so that capital accumulation becomes the primary objective, not a secondary outcome. This requires shifting from a mindset of saving leftover money to building a system where investment capital is prioritized before lifestyle expansion. The first mechanical step is defining a clear capital target. Instead of asking, "How much do I want to have invested someday?" the correct question is, "How much annual income do I want my investments to reliably generate?" If your current spending is $60,000 per year and you aim to cover that with investment income, a conservative planning assumption is a 4% annual withdrawal rate. This implies a target portfolio of approximately $1.5 million. This number is not aspirational, it is structural. It becomes the reference point for every financial decision. The second step is restructuring cash flow. Capital does not accumulate accidentally. It is the result of a consistently high savings rate applied over time. For most people, this means targeting a savings and investment rate of 25 to 35% of gross income. This range is not arbitrary. Below 20%, capital grows too slowly to meaningfully challenge labor income within a typical working career. Above 35%, the marginal benefit often declines due to lifestyle strain. The exact percentage will vary, but the principle remains. Savings rate is the primary lever. Mechanically, this means treating investments as a fixed obligation, similar to rent or taxes. Contributions should occur automatically, immediately after income is received. This removes behavioral friction and prevents lifestyle spending from absorbing surplus cash. Over time, raises and bonuses should increase investment contributions first, not expenses. This is how capital begins to accelerate. The third step is asset placement and accessibility. Not all invested dollars serve the same purpose. Retirement accounts offer tax advantages, but limited flexibility. Brokerage accounts offer accessibility but fewer tax benefits. A balanced system uses both. Retirement accounts can compound efficiently for later life, while taxable brokerage accounts can be structured to generate usable income earlier. This dual structure reduces the risk of being wealthy but trapped. From a stability perspective, the solution relies on diversified, low-cost investment vehicles rather than concentrated bets. Broad market index funds spread exposure across thousands of companies, reducing the impact of individual failures. Historically, diversified equity portfolios have produced long-term real returns sufficient to support gradual income replacement without requiring constant decision-making. Stability here does not mean the absence of volatility. It means avoiding strategies that require precise timing or exceptional judgment to succeed. Finally, the system works because it aligns incentives and time. As capital grows, investment income begins to scale nonlinearly. The first $100,000 may produce $4,000 annually. The next $500,000 produces $20,000. Eventually, annual market movements can exceed annual savings from work. At that point, money is objectively working harder than you are, not because of luck, but because the system was designed for that outcome. This approach does not promise speed. It promises reliability. By focusing on structure, savings rate, and scale, it converts abstract investing into a measurable process with predictable outcomes over long-time horizons. The practical solution is not to seek higher risk or attempt to outperform markets. It is to redesign your financial structure so that capital accumulation becomes intentional, measurable, and dominant over time. This requires shifting from a reactive approach, investing what remains after spending, to a system where investment capital is treated as a primary obligation. The first step is to define a clear income-based target, not a vague net worth goal. Ask a specific question: how much annual spending do I want my investments to cover? If current living expenses are $70,000 per year and you want investments to fully replace that income, a conservative assumption is a 4% sustainable withdrawal rate. That implies a target portfolio of approximately $1.75 million. This number is not a prediction, it is a planning anchor. Every decision about saving, spending, and career progression should be evaluated against how it moves you closer or further from that figure. The second step is to restructure cash flow around a high, consistent savings rate. Capital grows through surplus, not income. For most professionals, this means committing to investing 25 to 35% of gross income. Below that range, capital accumulation is typically too slow to meaningfully reduce work dependence within a 20-25-year horizon. The exact percentage is less important than consistency. Investments should be automated and executed immediately after income is received. This removes discretion and prevents lifestyle expansion from absorbing potential capital. Mechanically, raises and bonuses should not increase spending by default. A disciplined system routes the majority of incremental income directly into investments. If income rises from $100,000 to $120,000 and savings increase proportionally, the time required to reach the capital threshold shortens materially without increasing risk. The third step is designing asset placement with both growth and accessibility in mind. Tax-advantaged retirement accounts are efficient for long-term compounding, but are constrained by age-based access rules. Taxable brokerage accounts offer flexibility and can be used to generate income before traditional retirement age. A functional system uses both. This reduces the risk of having a high net worth but insufficient usable cash flow. From a risk perspective, stability comes from diversification and simplicity. Broad market equity index funds distribute exposure across thousands of companies and sectors. Over long periods, this reduces reliance on any single outcome. Volatility will occur, but the system does not depend on timing decisions or constant intervention. Income planning is based on conservative assumptions, not peak returns. As capital scales, the mechanics shift. Early on, personal savings dominate growth. Later, market returns do. A portfolio of $1.2 million growing at 6% adds $72,000 in a single year, often more than annual contributions from work. This is the structural point where money begins to work harder than labor, not because effort stops, but because capital has reached sufficient scale. This solution is stable because it is based on controllable variables: savings rate, cost structure, and diversification. It avoids reliance on forecasts, leverage, or exceptional skill. Over time, it converts effort into optionality and income replacement into a predictable outcome rather than a hope. At this point, the system can be summarized clearly. The core mistake is not insufficient income or lack of discipline. It is the absence of a defined threshold at which capital income meaningfully competes with labor income. Without that threshold, progress is measured emotionally rather than structurally, and investment success is confused with financial independence. A functional system has 4 components. First, a clearly defined annual spending target. This is not an estimate but a documented number based on actual expenses. Second, a capital target derived from that spending using conservative assumptions, typically 4 to 5% of portfolio value. Third, a saving structure that prioritizes capital accumulation before lifestyle expansion. Fourth, a diversified investment framework that allows capital to grow and eventually generate usable income. To understand how this system changes outcomes over time, consider a simple trajectory. In the first year, the most visible change is not financial freedom, but clarity. Cash flow becomes intentional. Investments are automated and measured against a defined goal. Net worth may increase modestly, but dependency on work remains high. This is expected. The system is being established, not rewarded yet. After 5 years, the structure begins to assert itself. A household investing $30,000 per year at a moderate return can accumulate approximately $170,000, $180,000. At this level, investment income remains small in absolute terms, but volatility no longer feels abstract. Market movements begin to rival annual contributions. More importantly, decisions about spending, housing, and career shifts are evaluated against their impact on capital growth rather than short-term comfort. At the 10-year mark, the difference becomes material. That same household may reach $450,000, $500,000 in invested assets. A 4% income assumption produces roughly $18,000, $20,000 per year. This does not replace work, but it meaningfully reduces financial pressure. Job changes carry less risk. Periods of lower income become manageable. Capital has not replaced labor, but it has begun to negotiate on your behalf. The immediate instruction is straightforward. First, Calculate your true annual spending and derive a capital target using a conservative withdrawal rate. Second, determine your current savings rate and identify how much of future income growth can be redirected toward investments. Third, automate contributions across appropriate account types to balance growth and accessibility. Fourth, review progress annually against the capital target, not against market headlines or short-term returns. The conclusion is not dramatic. Money begins to work harder than you do when it reaches sufficient scale, not when you feel financially successful. That scale is reached through structure, not optimism. By designing your financial life around measurable thresholds and controllable variables, investment income transitions from a background feature to a primary force. The outcome is not early wealth or guaranteed independence, but a system that predictably reduces reliance on work over time.